Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books I read in December 2019. December, the ugly stepchild of wrap-up months. Everyone is so much more excited about all the year-end content and looking forward to the next year's reading than they are about discussing December's reading. But I have not missed a wrap-up month since I started doing this in early 2015, and I am not about to stop now. Plus, in December, I read 3 books that ended up making it onto my favorites list, and I read what might be the most disappointing book I've ever read in my life. So let's get into it. Starting off, I read 2 books in a series. The first was The Wicked City, which I read in preparation to read its sequel, The Wicked Redhead, both by Beatrice Williams. I got The Wicked Redhead on NetGalley for review. These books are split between 2 women. There is one in the 1990s. Her name is Ella. She has just left her cheating husband. She has moved out of their marital home and into an old apartment building. And it just so happens that her exact apartment used to belong to a woman in the 1920s by the name of Ginger Kelly. So we have a second storyline in the 1920s that follows the Spitfire Ginger Kelly as she is caught up in a scheme to bust her bootlegging stepfather. I thought both books were a ton of fun. I just love Ginger Kelly. I think she is sharp and sassy and fiercely passionate. And Ella, on the other hand, is a little bit muted, especially in comparison. Ginger Kelly's sections take over the majority of the second book. She even took over the title. I thought the first book was more balanced in that regard. I think the sections were more equally divided between the 2 characters. And overall, I thought it was just better. But by the time I picked up the second book, I had already fallen in love with these characters, so I honestly didn't really mind. It was fun to just spend some more time with them. I found that both of these books were really easy to inhale. I ripped through both of them extremely quickly. So if you're looking for something like that here at the beginning of the year, you want to get yourself off to a good start, book count-wise, then these might be for you. If you are interested in hearing more about them, I did a review of the second book, The Wicked Redhead, for Open Letters Review, and I will leave a link to that review down in the description box below. Another really fun read this month was Well Met by Jen DeLuca, which is a contemporary romance with a Renaissance fair backdrop. The main character, Emily, moves to small-town Maryland after a breakup. She both needs somewhere to go and also wants to help out her sister who has just been in a bad car accident. It is the summertime and her teenage niece wants to volunteer at a Renaissance festival. But when Emily takes over the teenage drop-off duties from her sister, she finds out that teenage volunteers at the Renaissance festival can only volunteer if they have an adult volunteer with them. With her sister down and out, it appears that Emily's got the job, so she signs up to be a tavern wench, and as much as she's trying to be lighthearted about the whole thing, she's trying to just have fun with it, there is this one organizer, this hard-ass guy named Simon, who's taking the whole thing extremely seriously. You can probably guess what happens next. I definitely understood the gripes that some of the more experienced romance ladies here on BookTube had with this book and others like it, where the main source of the conflict is that these 2 characters just won't talk to each other. They won't tell each other what they're feeling. I am sure that really grates over time, but considering that I am a romance neophyte, I'm not that experienced with reading romance, I thought this was just delightful. I am convinced that nothing lifts my spirits like a romance book can. All right, let's keep talking about positive things. I am very much enjoying this. 3 books that I read this month ended up making it onto my top books of the year lists. I make one for fiction and one for nonfiction. Since I have already discussed these books in those respective videos, I will only briefly talk about them here. Unsurprisingly, Fingersmith by Sarah Waters ranked on my top fiction books of the year list. This is kind of a different take on The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, where 2 thieves scheme to steal away a wealthy woman's fortune. It is that, but it is many other things as well, and I would describe those many other things, except it would definitely spoil things for you, and I don't want to do that. But let me just say that my neck is still sore from the whiplash of this book. It is so twisty-turny. I saved this one for last because I am not sure I've heard a single negative thing about this book. It seems like everyone loves this one, and after having read it, I can see why it knocks everyone's socks off. I thought it was fantastic. Affinity is still my favorite Sarah Waters book, but this one is a very close second hint. And then one that came in hard at the end of the year was City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. I loved this book. It follows that sort of similar formula to The 13th Tale or The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, where you have an older woman telling her life story to a much younger woman. The story the woman tells here begins in 1940s New York City, where she, as a 19-year-old, gets into some crazy stuff running around with showgirls from her aunt's theater. She makes some great memories, some big mistakes, and ultimately ends up at a place in her life that she never could have expected. Although I wish, really and truly wish, that this book had a different title, because I am beyond over the girls in the title trend. I thought this book was sexy and fabulous. And then the nonfiction book I read this month that ended up a favorite was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This was the book that I hosted a read-along for at the beginning of the month. It is all about Bryan Stevenson, an attorney fighting a continuous uphill battle trying to get prisoners off of death row in the United States. In this book, he focuses on the stories of the people that he works for, how in the cases where the person actually did commit the crime, you can see how the people and the systems around this person since their birth had utterly failed them, and so unsurprisingly, they fell into a bad situation. Oftentimes, these people were victims of abuse in their early lives, and then with the way the prison system works, the focus isn't on rehabilitation. The focus isn't on getting these people better so they can go on to lead healthy, productive lives in society. Most frequently, the abuse continues or even gets worse. I won't lie to you and tell you that this is easy reading, because it's not. It is devastating, but it is so powerful. I think it is absolutely essential to read this, whoever you are, but especially if you're an American. It is critical that we know what's going on within our own country. Thank you to everyone who joined in on the read-along and read this book with me. It was definitely a hard book to read because of content, but reading it with all of you was a really remarkable experience. I'm also only going to quickly touch on the classic book that I read this month, which was A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is a novel set both in London and in Paris while the French Revolution is brewing. It follows an interconnected cast of characters, most of whom live in one of the cities, but most of the time have ties to the other city. I don't know if this is going to continue to be the case with every Dickens novel I pick up, but I just love his ideas and his descriptions of things. The way he wrote about hunger and the cold in this book, I don't think I'll ever forget it. But I hate the way he advances the story. I find it always to be such a slog. And it's so frustrating because I thought the story of this book was absolutely fascinating. And I loved the themes that he brings up. I think they're still piercingly relevant. I was thinking all sorts of things as I was making my way through this book. So I liked it, but also I didn't like it because it was not fun to get through. I really struggled. But in any event, I talked about the Wishbone episode that took on this book, a very strange selection in my opinion, in my latest episode of What's the Story Wishbone. If you would like to watch that, I will leave a link for that video down below. All right, playtime's over. Let's get into this. After years of anticipating her next book, I read The Starlight C by Erin Morgenstern. I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but despite being pretty certain that this book would end up being a favorite of the year, it was absent from my top fiction books of the year list. It's because I didn't like it. All of those glowing reviews from reviewers out there, I'm happy for you. I wish I could switch places with you, honestly, but I have no idea what you're talking about. It's no secret that I love the Night Circus, okay? I themed my 30th birthday party around the book. Everyone wore black and white with a touch of red, and I had the coolest cake in existence at that party. And yet, I kind of feel weird about all of that now. I cannot even tell you what this book is about. The plot is that scattered. I have had 5 years of book summarization experience here on this channel. It is my art by this point, and I wouldn't even know where to start. I know one of the criticisms of The Night Circus is that it is style over substance, that there's not a whole lot of plot. I don't entirely disagree with that. I love it despite its problems, but I also think that it has enough plot to keep things moving, and that all the imagery within it really does build up the atmosphere of the circus. It's one of the things I love most about it. But if you thought that about the Night Circus and that really tripped you up, it kept you from enjoying the Night Circus, do not pick up this book, because all the imagery in this book is imagery for the sake of imagery. There's really no purpose to it. That on top of the fact that she's just name dropping all of these books and video games that she likes the whole way through with no purpose, because this book was written just for her. It feels so self-indulgent. And listen, I do believe that writers should write things that they themselves would like to read. I absolutely believe that. But I also don't think that you should write a fluff piece that has no substance and just name drops all your favorite titles because you can. How did this get through edits? In this book, it felt like she was yearning for the night circus as much as I was. There is one dance scene that is so similar to one that happens between Celia and Marco. All the food descriptions she did in the night circus, she dialed them up to 11. I now know that she really likes honey. It breaks my heart to say this next thing, but I'm honestly wondering if, like a lot of other authors out there, she had one good book in her, because this was not good. So let's just take inventory here. First, there was Spinning Silver, which let me down in an enormous way after I just loved Uprooted. And then this book absolutely broke my heart. Can we add an addendum to the piece of advice of don't meet your heroes? Don't meet your heroes or read their follow-up book. I don't know what to do with this book now, because it is probably the most gorgeous book I have ever owned in my life. And yet I don't keep books around that I don't plan on rereading. I don't plan on rereading this. And also every time I see it, I'm reminded that it broke my heart because I was supposed to love this. I was supposed to love this. For a change of pace, let's talk about a pair of books that I didn't have very strong feelings about. The first of those two was my 5-star nonfiction prediction, which was The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver. This book is all about whether or not we can use statistics to predict outcomes of everyday life scenarios, but really it's just a collection of case studies with a ton of data in it. And then I also read Why We're Wrong About Nearly Everything by Bobby Duffy, which I got off of NetGalley. In this book, he discusses the way information is presented and what biases we have as humans that can distort our perceptions of said information. Basically, it's a mix of data and human psychology. I thought both of these were fine. I thought they presented some interesting data, but neither one of them was all that memorable. It's kind of one of those scenarios where 3 stars is the saddest rating, because I don't feel strongly about these books one way or another to really go on about them. And then the last pair of books that I would like to discuss in this wrap-up are 2 works of historical fiction, both set in Russia. The first of those is The Lost Season of Love and Snow by Jennifer Lamb. This book centers in on Natalia Pushkina, who happened to be the wife of the beloved Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. If you didn't know this about Pushkin, he actually died in a duel over his wife. That is not just a historical event, but also not a spoiler, since that's actually how this book opens. The story is told from Natalia's perspective. We get to hear about how these two meet, how they got married, what their life together was like, and then eventually Pushkin's death. Here's the thing about this book. I don't think it was awful, but I don't think it was particularly good either. I think she got close to doing enough with Pushkin's character, but she never took it far enough. And then Natalia, it wasn't just that she was historically inaccurate, because she was historically inaccurate, but also she wasn't engaging to read about at all. I think the author really wanted to make Natalia into this relatable wife and mother figure who just wanted to do right by her husband, but couldn't help but get sucked in by the machinations of the people within the Russian courts. She was so focused on doing that she made a story about Russia's most famous poet, one who died tragically and incredibly young in a duel over his wife, boring. She made that story boring. The thing I've noticed with some authors who try their hand at writing historical fiction set in Russia is that they focus almost exclusively on the characters. There is very little historical to match the fiction, to the point where it doesn't matter that these people are Russian. I feel that's largely the case because these authors don't know Russia and they haven't done enough research to actually paint the world that these characters lived in. They do that thing, I've talked about it before, but I seriously think some authors go, you know what's interesting? Russia. I should set my book there. And then they do their very, very narrow research and slap some vanilla characters down on the page. This book doesn't feel like Russia. I really wish I had better words for it than that. I wish I could describe it better than that. But either you understand Russia or you don't. Either you've done your research or you haven't. I personally think if you're not painting the world in which these characters lived, then you're not really writing historical fiction. One person who definitely knows what I'm talking about there is Adrienne Sharp, because her book, The True Memoirs of Little Kay, is the real deal when it comes to Russian historical fiction. This is the book that I selected off of my books that have been on my TBR the longest list this month. And now that I've read it, I am absolutely kicking myself that I did not pick this up sooner. This book's main character was also a real-life historical figure, Russian ballerina of Polish descent, Matilda Krzeszynska, who happened to be the mistress of Nicholas II before he married his wife Alexandra. The story of this book is told to us as though Matilda is looking back at her life when she is 99 years old living in Paris. And considering she lived and was prominent during very important years in Russia, this book is almost as much a story of Russia as it is Matilda's story. I looked into the author's background, and she's actually a trained dancer, which is probably how she knew of Matilda in the first place. So she had all of that background when she was writing about the dancing stuff, which I thought was fantastic. But she had no Russian studies, Russian history background, meaning she must have done a ton of research for this book, and it shows. Russia overfloweth from this book. Matilda was connected to the extended Romanov family for most of her life, so it was really important that the author made clear who was who in terms of Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses, and also what all was going on politically, and she did that in spades. She also just let Matilda be a conniving little opportunist and didn't make her particularly sorry about it, which not only makes for a good story, but it's also a part of who Matilda really was. I've read her memoir, I should know. She presents some really accurate Russian history in this book, which I can't even tell you how much I appreciated. And then the liberties that she did take with the history in order to sculpt this story were actually interesting. It was fun to imagine some of the things that she presented, even though I know they didn't happen, would have never happened. Meanwhile, it seems that every other novel that takes on the last Tsar and his family seems to be some kind of a take on, what if one of them didn't die? Authors really think they're pushing the envelope when they're like, what if 2 of them didn't die? I don't think that's cute, and I've said so before. We know the order in which they were mowed down with bullets in a basement, so maybe don't. That's the main reason why I shy away from Russian historical fiction that is set during what is probably my favorite period of Russian history, but this one was really good. First of all, it didn't annoy me. And secondly, it was extremely well done. I got to wrap myself up in all of the Russian history that I know and love like a big old blanket, and it was a wonderful experience. I highly recommend this if you were interested in reading some actually good Russian historical fiction. So those are all the books that I read at the tail end of 2019. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard of any of them, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them. You can put that or any other comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you would prefer to reach out to me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.